I do appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this morning. I tell you, I've been in your seat several times, so to be able to be here speaking is both an honor and a privilege, and it also carries with it some sense of responsibility to actually say something that's worth listening to. So hopefully we'll be able to head down that path. I have been asked to talk a little bit about myself and my background, and I hate doing that if I'm honest, but I've been asked to do it, so I'm going to do it. I'll get through that as quickly as I can and hopefully talk about the things that are relevant to the points that I'd like to make later. I'll tell you that I am first and foremost husband to Deborah of 26 years and father to Sarah and Amanda. Sarah is 24 and she is a second grade teacher in rural Mississippi. She's the only person in our family to get a postgraduate degree, so she now has proof that she's the smartest person in our family, even though she's been telling us that for about 20 years now. My youngest, Amanda, is a very talented artist, and she's currently at the Art Institute of Atlanta. So first and foremost, I'm blessed to have my family, and I've got a picture of them right here as I talk to you here this morning. So I'll start with my current job, just to give you a little bit of background. I am the CEO, as Randy said, of Morrison Management Specialists. Some of you in the South may have gone to Morrison cafeterias growing up. It's the same company. We're no longer in the cafeteria business. We currently provide food and facilities management to about 1,000 hospitals and senior living communities across the country. So I'd encourage you to come join us at any one of those locations and spend some time with us. We're just a fun organization. We get the opportunity to serve every day, and we take care of the sick and the elderly, and what could be kind of more important than that. So we're just blessed with a greater purpose every time we show up for work every day. So it's been just a wonderful career to have. We're part of a larger organization called Compass Group. We're in about 50 different countries, $25 billion. We are the world's third largest private employer. And just to give you a perspective, we're larger than McDonald's in the United States. So we're the biggest company you've never heard of, and that's actually by design. We're in the hospitality business. We don't want it to be about us. We want to be behind the scenes, just making sure you have a pleasant experience. But we are the ones to cook for you and to clean up after you. So when you see the cooks and janitors, just think, be nice, right? Take care of them. They're there to serve you. If I were to go way back, I grew up in New York. I had a couple of just wonderful parents, and I grew up as an athlete. I was a swimmer growing up, and my parents would get up at 3:30 in the morning, take me down to practice for 2 hours. I'd come home, go to school, get back in the car with my schoolwork, do my schoolwork on the way, go practice for 3 hours, come home and get up and do it all again the next day. So I was blessed to have parents who taught me a sense of discipline in being an athlete, and had some success with that. Actually was ranked #1 in the country in about 10 different events coming out of high school. Full ride to the University of Virginia. So for those Yellow Jackets of you out there, at least none of us are good at either football or basketball, so we have no threat here this morning. But came out of Virginia and got into the medical surgical business and had various roles in sales and operations. At one point ran a very large international distribution center down in Miami, and then got into the sales role. Had the opportunity to actually go into the surgical suites, because my job was to help surgeons design their supplies so that they had the most efficient operation and setup possible when they got in there. So as a kid, just 4 or 5 years out of school, I'm in watching total hips and total, heart replacements. I mean, just unbelievable surgeries, and it was just a wonderful experience. Kind of scary that I was in there, no medical degree, and helping surgeons design the process, but everyone survived, so that's the good news. About 7 years into my career, I took a very significant detour. I was with the largest medical supply company in the world in their best division. And we had a very small food service operation that provided meals for people who had various disease states, whether that was diabetes or cardiac disease or celiac disease or whatever the case may be. Very small business, about $50 million, small compared to the rest. And they decided to create a joint venture with Kraft Food Service. We all know Kraft. This was the food service distribution arm that they had. And they realized very quickly that they didn't have the right people in there to run the business because they were specialty salespeople, and this was running a very large business. And the idea of this joint venture was to take the food service expertise of Kraft and the healthcare expertise of the company that I worked for at the time, and create very specific services to healthcare food service operators. It's very different to feed 600 patients at Grady with clinical requirements and regulations than it is to feed us here at breakfast. So we had this unique skill set. And they came into these other divisions to look for people to go run that, and everyone said no. And what you need to know is that this division is where careers went to die. You know, if you were not doing great, you kind of ultimately ended up at this division. So people said no all the time. And so they finally came to me, and I did something that I would do 4 more times in my career, which is I took the job that nobody wanted. And my thought in taking that job was that, number one, I would learn a lot if it was the right job. And number two, if I succeeded in that job, I'd be able to distinguish myself and differentiate myself from the competition, so to speak. So I took that job, and my view of that job was I'm going to learn how to start a business on somebody else's dime. And that's exactly what happened. We went from 100 million in combined sales to 7 billion in 7 years. And you can just imagine the learning curve that I had as a young manager of a growth that dramatic. And I was in a pretty significant level in that company, so I had a chance to kind of see and help direct and help strategize all of that. So it was just an incredible learning curve. Had I stayed where I was, my learning curve might have been like that. Here it was like that. It was just a skyrocket. What I also learned was that these two companies, their cultures could not have been more diametrically opposed. These people just hated each other. I mean, it was just amazing. And if you did something that pleased one side of the business, it enraged the other side, and vice versa. And both companies would try to sabotage the joint venture to prove the other company wrong. And so I learned 2 things. Number one, I learned how to get things done myself, because if people are actually trying to harm you and not help you, you got to go in and figure it out yourself. And when you're growing from 100 million to 7 billion, you got a lot to figure out. The second thing I did learn, though, was how to take people with diametrically opposed opinions and bring them in and find common ground and have the opportunity to serve a client who was just asking for help. And so it was a wonderful experience to learn how to manage through that kind of situation. So it was just a fantastic experience. And within that company, I would take 2 more roles that were very similar. It was the job that nobody wanted. People beforehand had failed. Raised my hand, I stepped in, and ultimately was successful with that. At one point, I'm now about 16 years into my experience with the company, I get a call from a friend, and this is an entrepreneur friend of mine, and he says, "Hey Scott, I'm starting something over here in the medical business, and I think this same concept will work in food service, but I don't know anything about the food industry. You do. Let's go start a company together." I said, "You are crazy, man. You know, I got a family, I got, kids, I got a daughter with health problems, I got, a very nice job. I'm the president of this big organization. Why would I go do that?" But he kept calling, and he kept calling, and he kept calling. And so one morning we get up very early, we take a flight out to San Francisco, we drive down to Palo Alto to Sand Hill Road. And if you don't know Sand Hill Road, it's where just about every tech company you've ever heard of got their initial funding. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars gets invested out of Sand Hill Road every week. I mean, it's just a phenomenal place. We have a 5-page business plan that even I don't believe in, and we're going to ask for $2 million to start this company. So we walk into our first meeting, and there are 8 venture capitalists there, very preppy looking guys, and they have this air about them that says, "Hey, we got billions and you don't." We have entrepreneurs come in every day. They think they have great ideas, and they don't. We're going to be polite to you, just in case you're one of those few. Now, please begin. That's basically the kind of the feel of the room. So I can't remember who started talking, but I do know that I was going to be CEO if this company got funded, so I finished. And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And 8 guys stare back at me and don't say a word. And the whole time I'm thinking, "See, you're crazy. Why did you even spend the money on airfare to come out here?" So 2 minutes goes by, and I've at least known enough at this point that at some point you just shut up and you let the other person speak. And so I waited and I waited and I waited. And finally the senior partner leans into the table and he says, "I tell you what, if you promise not to go to your next VC appointment, I'll give you $10 million to start this company." Now, if you've never done that, I encourage you to try it once or twice. Because it's a blast. So I'm racing to take that 10 million, and my partner, my buddy says, no, you don't want to do that. They want more of your company because they love the idea. So let's go to the next appointments and get them leveraging each other to compete for our business, which we did. And somewhere around midnight California time, so 3 o'clock Atlanta time, we signed our letter of intent for $2 million. And 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my home without a laptop, without a cell phone, without a phone line, and just my wife already telling me on day one, you just need to get out of the house. So we got ourselves an office and started that company, and it went from literally zero, nothing, me as employee number one and the only employee, to a $2 billion company in 18 months. So the idea itself had just a lot of legs to it, and people really wanted the idea. And the whole idea was to bring transparency to a market that was very opaque. People were trying to play games. And as a result, the entire industry tried to crush this business. In fact, I had one multi-billion-dollar supplier kind of do the Nikita Khrushchev, pounding on the table, I will crush you. And I said to them, I tell you what, within 2 years, you're going to want my business. Are you sure you want me to leave the meeting this way? And he said, absolutely. 2 years later, he called me and asked for my business. So fortunately, I didn't remind him of that conversation, although I was thinking about it in the back of my mind. So from that, ultimately, Compass, my parent company, bought that company, and that's how I came into the family and got to where I was today. So with all that going on in my life, you might think that was the most important thing going on in my life, but as you've heard from Randy already, it was not. It was my daughter's situation. She was born with a very, very rare illness, and ultimately actually had cancer 3 times in her lifetime. At the age of 7, she was given 1 day to live. She's had 2 liver transplants, 150 surgeries, as you've heard. And so you can imagine that work, as important as it was, meant very little to me in light of that larger problem. And I will tell you that you learn a lot from that. Number one is you learn what your priorities are. I was out trying to raise millions of dollars, and all I'm thinking about is my daughter going to be alive when I get home? Or is the cancer back? Or what's this surgery going to do to her, and how long is the recovery going to be? I mean, I literally would be in presentations like this talking to people, and all I was thinking was back here, what's happening back at home? And so you learn what's important in life. So as good as things were, I knew that it didn't really matter. And when things were bad, I knew that they weren't as bad as what was going on at home. So in every situation, there's a gift in it. And that's one of the gifts you get as you learn to prioritize. You also learn what you're capable of. My schedule would be that I would leave on Monday morning. I would go travel for basically the entire week. I'd come back on Friday. We lived in Chicago at the time. And I would fly into O'Hare. I would drive to the University of Chicago hospitals where I'd meet my wife. We would spend 10 minutes debriefing on what the situation was, and she would go home to spend the weekend with my older daughter. I would spend the weekend with Amanda. And then Sunday night, about 5 o'clock, she would come. We'd spend 10 minutes debriefing. I would go home. I'd spend the evening with my daughter. I'd wash my clothes. I'd repack and head out and do it all again on Monday morning. So you learn kind of what you're capable of and what you have to stand up for. And as Randy said, it's kind of the fire, right? You either collapse under that or you become stronger under that. And fortunately, we grew stronger in a lot of different ways. You also learn humility. You can't control anything in this situation. So if you think you got it going on, you don't, because God's going to just turn around and show you what life is all about. And so I will tell you that you learn that you're not in control, and you learn to submit to that eventually. And that was a hard lesson for me because I like being in control. You learn unconditional love. I will tell you, our family did not live in Chicago, so we had friends. Very often strangers would hear of our situation, and they would step in and help us out, and learned love through that. And also learned how to serve other people as well. I realized going through that there's no manual of what you do when your child is sick. And so ultimately wrote a book called Amanda's Gift, and had the opportunity to help other parents going through that. And the first half of the book is kind of a how-to. You go through that. You know, how do you deal with hospitals and medical companies and insurance companies? And then the last half is what happens to your family, what happens to your faith, what happens to your marriage when you're going through things like that. And I've literally had the chance to connect with people around the world as a result of this. So it's provided a wonderful vehicle for service along the way. So given the life background and the business background, let me just share a few thoughts with you if I could. And I'm going to start with a quote that's sometimes attributed to William Foster, but nobody's really sure where it came from. And for me, at least on the work front, but also from just a life perspective as well, this really kind of sums up things for me. And it talks about quality, but I would talk about that as also the quality of your relationships, the quality of your marriage, the quality of your children. So this is more of a life lesson, I think, than just a work lesson. But the quote is, "Quality is never an accident. It's the result of high intentions, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives." And I love that, because some people will just sit around waiting for things to happen. And this kind of stresses that you need to have a plan. It's as a result of high intentions, having a very big goal for yourself, but it also talks about being skillful and making wise and intelligent decisions as well. And I think that really models a career, if you will, that you've got a plan to go out and be excellent at what you do, that you sincerely work towards that plan, and that you have some sort of background to be able to go and execute it. So if I were to unpack that quote a little bit, just in terms of lessons that I've learned over time, I'll kind of offer you a few things. And the first thing I would offer you is surround yourself with great people and then take great care of those great people. I meet with every new manager who comes into our business, and I spend 2 hours with them. And we hire about 1,500 managers a year, so that's not a small commitment. And I spend that 2 hours, and at one point I bring out a slide and I say, I could spend just 2 minutes with you and put this one slide up and you'd get 95% of what I'm going to tell you, and it just says great people. And that is, if you hire the right people, you put them into the right job, you treat them with love and respect and dignity. If you encourage them, if you inspire them, and if you lead them, not manage, but lead them, if you train them, if you develop them, and if you promote them, you'll move mountains together. And I think that's just the absolute essence of what makes great companies great, is getting the right people in place and then treating them like the prized possessions that they are. And that's probably, if there's one thing you take away, that would be it. The second thing is excellence. And I'm talking about having a standard of excellence that's probably greater than the standard that you have for yourself right now. I think we need to be great at our craft. Not just pretty good, not just above average, but great. I worked once for a company that was owned by an investment banking firm, and these guys all worked for Jack Welch in their career, the CEO of GE, which for many years was known as the best company in America. And I'll tell you, there's a reason why they're the best company in America. You know, part of which is they're a little bit ruthless, part of which, and the greater degree of which, is that they are just some of the finest business people you would ever meet. I went to a board meeting once with this group, and I thought I was very prepared for this board meeting. I was supposed to be there for 10 minutes. I was there for 3 hours, because they sensed that I didn't have the same standard of excellence and I didn't have the same level of preparation that they had. And I will tell you, I was never the least prepared person in the room again. I was always the most prepared person. And their standard of excellence was so far above mine that it just taught me so much about what real big goals are all about. As big as I thought my goals were, their goals were 10, maybe 100 times more than mine. And I learned from that what a real standard of excellence is. And you only get that by hanging around excellent people. So I'd encourage you to surround yourself with that. I'd encourage you to know what you're good at, know what you excel at, and then surround yourself with people who are good at the things you're not good at. And don't try to pretend like you're good at those things. Be good at what you're good at, and then surround yourself with people who are excellent. I will tell you that I tell my team, if you're just like me, I don't need you because I've already got me, right? I need people who are not like me, different life experiences, different cultural intelligence, different life backgrounds, different philosophies. And what I would encourage you to do is to get those people in your business and then encourage disagreement. I used to think that I wanted the team always to agree. That's the worst thing you can do, because then all you do is you got tunnel vision on one perspective. You get to a better perspective, you get to a better solution when you surround yourself with people who are very different than you and then allow them to be different in the marketplace. And I think that ultimately brings the absolute greatest goal. The other thing I'd share with you is that I think great companies just begin with the desire to make things better. I'm reading the Steve Jobs biography right now. I don't know if anybody's read or is reading that, and it's very instructive, in large part because you can learn how not to manage people. This was not a nice man and not a great leader from my perspective. But even at his most selfish, his entire goal was to make computing easier, better, faster, and more friendly and more available to the masses. And very often, he didn't even take a salary. In fact, he refused it. People said, I want to give you stuff. He said, I don't want it. I just want to make Apple better. I just want to make products better so that people can get these products. And his partner, Steve Wozniak, was actually a nice guy. And he just wanted, when they got founded, he just wanted to give it away. I mean, their whole intention was, let's just make things better for people who are just like us. And they're now the most profitable company in America. So when I say begin with that intent, I'm not just saying that to be, socially, politically correct. I'm saying if you begin with that intent, I think that intent gets rewarded because people want things to be better. And if your intent is to make money, I think that comes through in a lot of different ways. But if your intent is to provide value, I think that comes through in a lot of different ways, and that attracts more customers in the long run. You may make a quick buck the other way, but you won't make a sustainable buck the other way. The other thing I'd share with you is to be fearless. As I mentioned, 5 times in my career, I took the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. And as a result of that, my learning curve was like that. And I don't think I'd be anywhere close to my skill set right now if I'd taken the comfortable path. And sometimes that's going to involve failure. Not everything I did worked perfectly, but I think I've learned more from my failures than I've learned from my successes. So everything is good. You just have to put it in that perspective. So I would encourage you to be fearless. Not reckless, not ridiculous, right? But be fearless. I think something I'm also learning kind of later in my career is good stewardship. And stewardship, from my perspective, is treating your business as though it's not your own, that it's somebody else's prized possession that needs to live on for generations. I went to a meeting with a customer relatively recently, within the last year, and the customer asked me for my long-term business plan, and I very proudly and boastfully talked about our 5-year plan, thinking how strategic and long-term thinking I was. And he very graciously thanked me and then told me that he thinks in terms of hundreds of years, not 5 years. And what was our business going to be generations from now when I'm no longer the leader? Very humbling moment for me, but just transformed my view of how I run a business. And so when it comes to stewardship, that's being good stewards of your people. Right? You're there to serve your people and make life better for them and have them be very fulfilled and excited about their jobs. It's being good stewards of your customers. You're not there to take advantage of them. You're there to make things better for them. It's being good stewards of your company. They don't owe you a paycheck. You owe them excellence. And it's being good stewards of your community as well. I will tell you that we have spent millions of dollars on things we've never gotten paid back for, to reduce the carbon footprint, for example, in our country. We've been voted one of the best places to work in healthcare, and that's out of tens of thousands of companies as a result of that. I think if you take that stewardship approach, you think differently, you act differently, and you succeed differently in life. May be subtle. I don't think it's subtle. I think it makes a huge difference over the course of a career. And then lastly would be servant leadership. We've all read Good to Great. We know about the level 5 leaders. What I love about that is not just the description of a level 5 leader, but it is proof that if you have a servant leadership mentality, that you have better sustainable results over time. Right? A level 4 leader or below may have a flash in the pan kind of success rate, but the best companies sustainably over time have servant leaders where it's more about the people than it is about the company. In terms of life lessons learned, I will tell you that I don't think you can be successful at work if you're not successful at home. And I think who you are as a person and who your family is much more important than what your career is and what your title is. And so I will tell you that I think whether it's your wife or your husband and your children, ultimately the most important priority. and you're there to serve them, I think, more than anything else. And I think if you start with that perspective, life works out a whole lot better, including at work. I just recommend that you be careful that your job doesn't define who you are, but that you define who your job is. We're all so busy that we can ultimately succumb to those pressures, even if it's just the busyness. Not that we'll compromise our values, we'll just succumb to the busyness and get more focused on the world than about who we are. So I'd encourage you to think about that. And I'd also encourage you to get friends who hold you accountable. I've got a couple who aren't afraid to speak up, and I'm grateful for it. And I think it's great to be in a group where you can have people who can honestly share with you what they think you got going on in your life. I'll also tell you that for me, kind of life lessons has been a faith journey as well. For me, it's been about experiencing how to live my faith in the workplace. And I'm not talking about evangelizing there by any means. I'm talking more about being a living testament and living as though you're serving somebody else and not yourself. And the last decade in particular for me has been a very serious faith walk. And I ultimately wrote a book with some principles that I think help you explore your faith in the workplace as well. It's called Putting God to Work. And we're going to offer these to you. I'm not sure if I have enough copies for everybody, but we'll see your faith at work when you go out and if you don't have a book available. But we're just going to give them away at the front on your way out the door. And I hope that helps you in your faith walk as well. And I think ultimately if you live as a living testament, then it attracts people to come talk to you about your faith and gives you the opportunity to have that conversation. And I recently read an article in the New York Times. Some of you may know Jeremy Lin. He's a New York Knicks basketball player. And they asked Jeremy, he said, how do you reconcile your faith, because he is a man of faith, with this very selfish sport where you've got to be about you as the star, you've got to be about your team, you've got to be about being a warrior because you're out there in combat. And he said, you know what, I'm trying to figure that out. He was very honest. He said, well, one thing I know, though, is that when I show up to play basketball, I'm not here for the crowds, I'm not here for myself. I'm just giving my game up to God. And that was very instructive for me. Is, one, I'm still trying to figure this out, but number two, I'm just giving my game up to God, and I'll figure that out along the way. So, what I would encourage you to do, I'm going to turn it back over here to Randy in just a minute. We're going to talk about some leadership groups that you can join, kind of heading down that servant leadership path, that level 5 leadership path. So if you have interest in joining that, I would encourage you to do so. I will tell you that small groups for me have been such an important part of my life. It's ultimately, I think, what brought me to where I am in my career. And actually with my travel schedule, I can't participate as much as I want to, but I would encourage you, if you're not in a small group, whether it's this group or any group, I'd encourage you to get involved. So I thank you for your time this morning. I hope some of this has been helpful. I just appreciate the fact that you all came out early and spent some time this morning with this group. So thank you. I'll be here after if anybody has any thoughts or questions. Appreciate it.